Okay, moving on. There's the red eye tool. It's pretty straightforward. If we had red eyes, you could basically just click on the eye and it will do its best to remove it. And you could change the pupil size. But again, there's no red eyes in this picture, so it's not going to work. Here is the brush tool and the pencil tool, color replacement, and mixer brush. I don't use color replacement or mixer, but the brush tool I do use. And that lets you use a series of brushes. Up here, you can select your style of brush. It could just be circles, soft circles, and it could be actual kind of brushes that give you a little bit more of a brush stroke. And so you can use that if you wanted to do something like draw something on your graphic that required kind of a bit more of a brush stroke. Now we're going to need a color here. So I'm just going to select a color, maybe a light blue. And I'm just going to start brushing. So you could see that it kind of has a cool little effect. If I wanted the brush size to be bigger, you can change the brush size right here. And now we have a bigger brush size. So that's the brush. And the pencil tool basically just gives you a pencil, and you can change the size of the pencil. It's basically just doesn't have the brush stroke look. It's just a straight sort of, I guess, pencil. Now down here, I don't really use the clone stamp tool and the pattern stamp tool. It's basically if you wanted to create a pattern out of something. So if I wanted to, I don't know, grab Steven's eye here, make this bigger. I'm going to use Option to create a source. And if I wanted to copy, say his eye was a little bit funny and I wanted to duplicate his eye, or if I wanted to do something funny like, oh, let's see, maybe let's give him a unibrow. Let's go Option, select his eyebrow. I'm going to make this selection a bit smaller here. And you could just kind of just click and it will just, you know, do a pretty bad job in this case. There we go. There you go. He kind of has a little bit of a unibrow there. So again, I don't really use this. You can use it. People use it for certain cases that work quite well. This was just a very silly, easy example of the clone stamp tool. Pattern stamp tool kind of works in the same way, but I don't use it for web design. Down here is the history brush tool and the art history brush. So if you wanted to brush, basically, instead of Command Z, you can kind of brush it away. So it's kind of like a fancy edit undo. So if I wanted to soften this, I can kind of glaze over it like that, or I can change the opacity up here in this the settings bar, just to kind of keep the unibrow look and mix it in a little bit. So that's kind of how that works. Art history brush tool, I don't use that ever. I've never actually used it, so I don't imagine you need to use it either. All right, here we have the eraser tool. It works like an eraser. If you wanted to erase something, very simple. Background eraser tool. I'm assuming it tries to erase the background. Again, I don't really use this tool. I'm not really sure kind of the purpose of it. Yeah, it tries to figure out the background. As you can see, it kind of works like a little bit like the magnet lasso tool. And it tries its best to remove only the background. So in some cases that might be helpful, but it's kind of clunky and it doesn't look very good. So I'm going to remove those. That's kind of how that works. Down here we have the gradient tool, the paint bucket, and 3D material. I don't use this, but the gradient and paint bucket I do use. Gradient, for example, if I wanted to, let's do a really quick selection. I'll show you. So I'm going to select my brother and I using the quick selection tool. I'm going to make the sample size a bit bigger using the right and left square brackets on the keyboard. This is just going to be a really, really quick selection. It's not even going to be very clear. You can make it really crisp and do a really good job of this sort of stuff, but I'm just going to keep it really simple. I'm going to remove a selection by clicking the Option key while I drag. There we go. Good enough. Now what I can do, is I want to delete the background. So I want to invert this selection, because if I just hit delete, I'm just going to delete, or it's just going to remove the foreground in the selection, but I want to invert the selection so it deletes the background. So really quick, I'm going to double click on this layer to unlock it. And now I can go select inverse. And now it's inverted the selection. I can delete the background. As you can see, it kind of cut off my ear and we look a little funny, but now we just have a layer of us on a transparent background. If I quickly add a new layer right here, now we'll get into this a little bit later of this section of Photoshop, but I'm just going to create a new layer and drag it below here so it's in the background. And I'm going to use the gradient tool. As you can see here, we have different style gradients, like so. And there is the linear gradient, the radial gradient, and then a couple other styles. These are the only two I use. I'm going to use the radial and just click and drag. And it will give a gradient background. So you can see it kind of does, it kind of added a gradient to the background. So you could do a good job of this, but this again was a very kind of gross example. Let's put that back so you don't have to stare at that weirdness. All right. And then down here we have the blur tool and the sharpen tool. Blur tool is say if you wanted to blur a part of a photo. Let's blur these lines up here. It's very subtle. You can see that it kind of worked. I'll blur his eye too. Maybe you'll see that better. There we go. Blur, sharpen. Lets you sharpen a section. Let's go really crazy on this so you can see that it sharpened it. If you want to sharpen, the hair a little bit and make it stand out, sharpen the eyes, a little bit of the mouth and the nose, you can see that it kind of sharpens it up a little bit. And then the last one of this is the smudge tool. If you just wanted to do a little bit of a smudge, so let's smudge my nose. If you wanted to kind of do some funny Photoshop and play around. There we go. Kind of look like a hobbit or something like that. There we go. And now down here we have the dodge, burn, and sponge tool. Dodge basically lightens the color, or it makes a section of a photo lighter. So let's make his teeth very, very white. I'm going to drag that across here. You can see that the dodge made his teeth very white. Burn. I can burn a section, which means it will make it darker, or burn, give it a burn effect. So I want to burn his lips a little bit, which kind of will make them a little bit more red. Change this to mid-tones. And you can kind of see that it kind of gave it a little bit of a weird burn effect. I use that sort of stuff if you want to like darken a section of a, darken your eyebrows. Or the eyelashes. The burn effect works quite well. Or say a beard, if you wanted the beard to be a little bit darker. My beard isn't quite full, so if you add the burn effect, so here for example on Steven, I can make his beard look very full. Just using the burn effect. So it darkens kind of the hairs in this section of the photo. And now you can see his beard looks a little bit more full. He's kind of starting to look like a pirate, actually. The sponge tool basically desaturates, meaning it removes color. So say if you had a really red face, or if you had a sunburn, you can desaturate. And it kind of, in some cases, makes it a little gray. I think it works great on teeth, because sometimes teeth will have stains on them. And it will help remove the stains on the teeth. And so you can kind of see there. I'll kind of just go a little overboard so you can see it desaturated this whole section. So now his mouth is black and white and he kind of looks like he has some sort of disease, but it works quite well if you wanted to remove stains from teeth or eyes or something like that. I don't use the pen tool or any of these very much, but the pen tool just kind of helps for selection if you wanted to. It's kind of a little bit of a complicated tool if you wanted to make a little bit of a clean sort of selection, like so. It takes a little bit of practice. I would suggest trying it out. but I don't use it very much for web design. Maybe if you're graphic designing, it would be a little bit more useful, but I don't use it very much. So there's my pen drawing. I can right click and make a selection, and now I will have a selection that kind of has a bit more of a smooth shape. Now we have the text tool. This is very common. Let's go back to the coffee cup here. The text tool, there are different ones here. I basically only use the horizontal type tool, but you can use vertical type or these other ones as well. So the horizontal type tool, you can click a section and you could start typing text like, now that was pretty small. I could select that and change the size to something a bit bigger. I'm just going to make that bigger by dragging that. Now I did that. You might be curious. I went Command T, and that gives me the ability to kind of transform this and make it a bit bigger. There we go. Now I'm going to use the Move tool using keyboard shortcut V. There we go. And I'm going to reselect this with my text tool, and you could change the font. You could change the size, you could change the color, and so on and so forth. And you can move it around with the Move tool. And that's basically how you use the text tool. The vertical type tool is if you wanted to add vertical text like so. Like that. And then there's the horizontal type mask tool and the vertical type mask tool. I don't use these, so I'm just going to skip them. Path selection and direct selection, you don't really need to know how to use that. It's you can look into it, but it's not common. I maybe use it 1% of the time, and even still, you could forego that. If you're curious, you can always look that up and figure it out. It's very simple. Down here we have the shape tool. It basically lets you create shapes, rectangles, rounded rectangles, ellipses, polygons, lines, and custom shapes. So rectangle tool basically lets you create a vector shape rather than just a pixel shape. So if I can, I'll draw a rectangle here. I can choose the fill, a different color. I could choose the stroke, meaning the border, and you can change the style of the border, all that sort of stuff. You can resize this by using the Move tool, or you can move it around using the Move tool. And if you wanted to reshape it, you go Command T, and that will transform it, letting you redo the size. Rounded rectangle, it is what it is. It will be a rounded rectangle. If you wanted the radius of the edges to be bigger, you can change that up here. There we go. Now we have a 20 pixel radius. There it is. And then there is the ellipses, which is, circles and so on and so forth. Polygon is a polygon. Line lets you create lines. And then there is the custom shape tool for things like arrows. Up here you can choose a shape. So like a tree. If I wanted a tree, I can click and drag and have a tree. There we go. Then here we have the hand tool and the rotate view tool. I don't use these, so we're just going to skip them. This is the zoom tool, and this is quite commonly used. If you wanted to zoom in on a section, you can click to zoom. And if you wanted to zoom out, you can choose the zoom out up here using the magnifying glass, the negative one, and you can zoom out like so. You can also zoom in and out using Command plus or minus, which is what I use. And to reset the view, you can choose 100%, fit screen, or fill screen. And I'm just going to go back to 100, fit screen actually. And yeah, that's basically the toolbar. It's a very kind of quick overview of the toolbar. We'll be going through some more of the tools and using them a bit more as we go on in the next lectures. But for now, we're going to leave it like that. So let's jump into the next lecture, and I'll see you there.